is telling me that it's show time. It's show time for our podcast. This is, of course, Journey of an Aesthete podcast. I hope the audio is clear. Always check in with our producer, Laurie Strickland, and other people. Make sure that sound is clear. This is a series, of course. Well, maybe series isn't quite the right word. It's only 2 episodes, so this is part 2 on more or less how I create this very podcast. And so it's a very interesting metaphor and dream, to make something become real. I wanted to start, one of the things that occurs to me, because I had to make an outline for this. Episode 1, if you recall, I talked a lot about, I think maybe perhaps too much, about how I relate to guests, because it's important to me, that I, of course, the ethics of having a guest, the respect I owe as a host a guest. But also the back and forth, the dance, the connection between 2 people. This is a very different kind of show I'm doing this very moment in front of you, the world. It's different because it's just me alone talking, and I would be lying to you if I said to you I didn't have a little bit of ambivalence about it. Not so much the fact of me pontificating and speaking for better or for worse, because I don't necessarily mind that. And it isn't the case that I don't think I have anything of value to say, because I think I do have some things of value to say. I don't think a lot, but some, and I don't deny that necessarily. So what is the ambivalence? Well, there's really, the first thing I thought about when I thought of doing this show was really thinking about, believe it or not, the guest, which is 2 people. So originally it was just audio only back in 2020, 2019, the pre-COVID days, pre-pandemic days. And there's an excitement of me. I could sit in my chair here, and let's imagine you're Frank. I'm going to invent a person. Frank Turner. Hi, how you doing? Somebody said hi. I don't know who that is. Cooper Mule. Let's say you're Frank Turner, and Frank Turner is a tenor saxophone player who played in the mid-70s in a big band and became kind of a, I don't want to say low level or minor, but not a famous, a very good musician, but someone that jazz people know, people like myself. Frank Turner, let's say I really love Frank Turner. I love his records, and I get him on my show. In much the same way, I was fortunate to have the great, now this person is a superstar in my view, one of the top tier tenor saxophonists, Pete Chrisley, who was with the Night Show. I had him, but it's somebody that's not as well known. And so what's great about that is Frank Turner's sitting there, or I'm sitting here, and I can say, hey, Frank, Mr. Turner, good to see you. Tell me about your first exposure to music. Did you start on piano? Did you start on clarinet? And I can sit there, and I know Frank Turner, if he's from Detroit, he's from Chicago, he's from Philadelphia, I'm inventing this imaginary person, he's going to have a lot to say. He's going to talk about his family. He's going to talk about his brothers and sisters. He's going to talk about the very first music he heard. Maybe it was on the radio. Maybe the first music he heard was I don't know, Chicago Blood, Sweat, and Tears if he's really young or something. Or maybe the first music he heard was Mary Martin, and Sound of Music, the LP, like some of these LPs I have over here. Maybe it was rock and roll. But I have to say, it's just the sheer pleasure. I just get such joy, unabashed joy at listening to people tell their stories. Listening to Frank Turner tell his story about how he learned. And I gotta say, to me as a piano player, Playing a saxophone ain't easy to me. It's hard. I mean, you got to put that instrument in your mouth, and then there's the fingering and breath, and all that is just utterly, as fascinating to me as if I weren't a musician myself and I had spent an enormous amount of time around so many very good saxophonists. So it's a little bit exotic and exciting to hear, how did you learn about music? And I'm just interested in that. And I dealt covered some of this in part one, but I just want to indulge me. I just want to go over a little bit because before we get to some additional things, there's just a pleasure and excitement in hearing the story, because when I hear Frank Turner's story, I'm hearing the story of an era. I'm hearing the story often of a generation. I'm hearing the story of potentially of music itself, if it's a musician like Frank Turner. Of African American music itself, if that's what we were discussing. But it could be anything. It could be a potter. It could be a painter. I had coal miner on a show. I'm saying hi to everybody. Thanks for coming in. I'm trying to do two things at once, trying to juggle the thing I prepared and talking about the podcast and talking to people coming to the chat. I'm happy. Also, like and subscribe to us because we're a one-of-a-kind show. In due course, we will discuss how we, in what ways we are unique. So that's just kind of the thing about having a guest. And so the ambivalence, I guess, is I'm here alone. There ain't nobody else here to bail me out. There's nobody else here to tell a joke or put us at ease. I've got to do this myself, And even though I have my piano here and I can sit down at the piano if I feel I'm not entertained enough or not witty or pithy enough or all the other things that I might think I should be, of course. So, this podcast was a way originally to, I guess, do those two things, to respect a guest, to feature a guest, not myself, but the guest. I would even take a back seat. But there's another thing I want to consider because it's really, really important, and I didn't really get into this in part one, is my level, and there's just no other way of putting this without, I don't want to sound hubristic, it's my level of education, which is admittedly unusual. So one of the last episodes I did was a Valentine's show with my girlfriend Joanne Davis Woods, and in that show, off the bat, even though the show was about Patti Smith, the very first thing I did was make a joke about a Happy Days TV spinoff called Joni Loves Chachi. And I talked about, the actors Scott Baio and Aaron Gray made a joke, made fun of that show, and 70s, early 80s show. But think about this. In one episode, I discussed, Gary Marshall TV sitcom. I discussed the Marxist, Leninist, Maoist films of Jean-Luc Godard. I referenced them, rather. I didn't discuss them in detail because Patti Smith had seen Sympathy for the Devil, the Rolling Stones, and I made clear in that show that, when people are, most people are exposed to Godard, they see Breathless, or they maybe see Weekend, or Contempt because of Brigitte Bardot and her beauty, or I don't know, Alphaville, his science fiction, the 50s stuff, the hits, right? I've seen all of Godard, almost all, including Numero Deux and some of the more difficult of his films. And I've certainly seen all of his communist films of that period. And I referenced them, Wind from the East, and 1+1, Sympathy for the Devil, and La Chinoise, in these pictures. I'd seen those. I also had seen them in theaters, which means I didn't watch them in a VHS at home, only I saw them at Film Forum, or Lincoln Center, or Beaker Street Cinema, or Waverly. There's just so many theaters. The Thalia, Quali, Quad, and all these different theaters in New York and in Boston. So I've experienced all of these different Godard films. So when I spoke about my feeling that I really like, I mean, I don't mind those films, even though I strongly disagree with his politics and his Maoism in those films. At the same time, they're as films, and in Sympathy for the Devil or 1+1, it's not only the Rolling Stones, or that's part of it. It's the Black Panther material, and it's the Marcus Garvey stuff, and it's all of it. It's like a collage, right? Like live theater and collage. It's undescribable style of Godard. So it's really thinking about those movies as aesthetic objects, by which I mean, of course, Patti Smith is writing a poem about Robert Bresson, her favorite filmmaker, but also talking about Godard in French cinema. So she knows all of French cinema and seen all of it. I've seen a lot of it, not all of it, as much as I can. And that goes into my nervous system, into my spirit, my heart, my consciousness. And that's to say nothing of the written material. In other words, I've read Proust's Time Regained. And I even discussed it in our show on Love, the series I discussed Proust. And I've read Moby Dick, and War and Peace, and the plays of Shakespeare, and seen them. And so, in this one episode with my girlfriend Joe, I joked about very pop types of things, like a TV show, but also very lofty things, like a Bresson movie. Inside the same episode, there's that kind of diversity of the what we used to call the low and the high, the popular and the obscure. Not that all of it's good necessarily. Some of it might be quite bad, and the popular thing might be the good thing, and the obscure, rarefied thing might be the not so good thing. It's not always, a one-to-one relationship where obscurity equals excellence or commercial equals trash or equals mediocrity. It doesn't work quite like that, right? And it's very personal. So I've experienced all of these books and seen all of these thousands of movies over the years, starting when I was a child. And I bring all of that into every episode so that even if I don't talk much, if I shut up, and hearing Frank Turner speak about the saxophone, I've seen Dexter Gordon perform and sat, Dexter Gordon and George Cable's performing. So I've heard Dexter up front, and Jimmy Heath, and some of the great saxophonists, in person in a club in the 70s and 80s. So I know what it is like to be in the room with that kind of music. And it's not secondhand or thirdhand. It's not seeing a clip on YouTube. As a 30-year-old, it's as a 30-year-old in a club, and in some cases playing with tenor saxophonists in person as part of being a pianist. So one of my crazy ideas, this phrase, God is in the details. And so I thought, which is the architect, I think, Miss Van der Rohe said that, I think. Or maybe it was Le Corbusier. I don't know, one of those Bauhaus people. I like to start from a detail. And then only later on, moving outwards from the detail, only later on do we get sort of theme, plot, story, the big picture, the overall mise en scène, the painting, the landscaping from the detail. And so there's a detail in this show. And of course, what I mean is yours truly in a snowstorm. So I'm going to show this image again. It's the image that I started with. Look at that. Now I put this up here. This is interesting. I'm 28 years old in this picture. Okay. So this means it's 1995, and this was right in front, literally, right in front of my apartment where I was living in 1995 in Boston. And as you can see, this was not my car, thank the Lord, but it was someone's car. And as you can see, it looks like the tree is growing out of the vehicle, doesn't it? It looks like the tree. So the storm is so bad that the tree sort of basically went inside this person's car, this vehicle. And to give you a sense of that kind of weather, this is what it looked like when there wasn't all that snow. And 28-year-old me with my briefcase and my hat, I'm still the same way there, right, with the briefcase. All those many decades ago. Let's see here. I just want to show you where I was living, just sense that it wasn't always like that. Here we go. This is what it looked like. Same block. That's where I was living. Doesn't that car kind of look like this? Looks a little bit like that same car in the picture from 1995. Although this photo is much more recent, but that's kind of give you a sense of where I was in physical space and time. You know, it's kind of interesting. If you want to get a shot of this is what, look at all those buildings. This is kind of, where are we here? Yeah, this is the kind of architecture. That's the top of where I was living. You can see there, everybody makes fun of the red brick and that, but this kind of architecture, which I do miss, is very old and solid, you know, and it's very urban and maybe perhaps as well urbane. And so that's what I'm calling a detail, like the aesthetic detail of me in front of that car. That poor guy, car was totaled, and me emerging from my apartment to see this great snowstorm. And I experience weather like that all the time. All the time, at least every winter, something like that. Like clockwork in January, February. And another interesting thing about weather like that then is that life partly goes on, by which I mean you don't get a power outage just because there's a foot of snow or there's ice even, because the infrastructure is underground, you know. And living here in a more rural environment, it's a different infrastructure. And so I feel the elements more, and there's more repercussion to, you know, inclement weather, as they say. And so why am I going on and on about weather? Does it matter? Well, yeah, it does matter, because, you know, weather matters, you know, and climate change is all about weather and how it affects us. And of course, it's a shot of this guy's car, a tree going into, can you imagine a tree going into your car in the snow? I think that just, so I started with that image. And it gives us something to talk about. It's sort of like a, you know, like at a cocktail party, you have a conversation starter, and that picture could be a conversation starter. Just like this tie, given to me as a gift by Joe, is from the early 80s. And it's funny, it made me think, you know. Made me dig out this old Gentleman's Quarterly with no lesser figure than the great James Garner on the cover. Good old James Garner from 1984. And so this tie's from 84. And so if you open it up and you can see just a different era. See some of the ads in here. You can see these ads for neckties. They're kind of a little bit narrower, right? What we got there. And, you know, like this is narrow. And so this tie is an object of its time, of the early 80s, 84. And so I think an enormous amount, when I prepare these, every episode, even when it's an episode that I'm not going on and on, it's just not me alone. Even if there's other people, a guest, I always think about all of these. I reflect actually quite consciously and for a good period of time about the meaning of the passage of time and the passage of eras, you know, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 00s, you know, the Y2K, the different, the 2020s, you know, where we're in now. And I think about, you know, often, you know, it's going to sound corny, but what it all means, you know. And it informs every episode I do, even when it's an episode where it's not immediately apparent that it's that those things I just mentioned are, integral or indispensable to a particular episode or a topic or a theme. So I thought it'd be interesting. We're going to get to some other matters, but since we're talking about 28-year-old me, I thought it'd be interesting to play a piece of music I wrote and recorded when I was 28 in 1995, and I dug it out here. I'm going to sit at the piano and do that because it's a time. And also, this is me that same year, the snowstorm. There's yours truly. I am wearing white trousers, even though it was in the winter, because I was doing a photo shoot for a promotional material. And as you can see, I had a very different piano. So much younger then. Look at that. That's me. There I am in 1995. What else? Did I leave something out? The tie I'm wearing, I still have, believe it or not. See? And I've worn this tie before. This is a Stork Club tie from the 1962. And I'm wearing that in this picture. See? And so we have a tie from 62. We have a tie I'm wearing now from 1984. This piano's from 1979. You know, maybe that's why my music and what I create borrows from more than one era, you know. Maybe it is a mashup. Maybe it's a blend of many things. Maybe that's to be expected. I don't know. So I had to make an outline for this as I did the other episodes because there's a lot to consider, right? So I just wanted to get that out of the way about, I like doing solo shows. I'm not against it, but I have a little bit of ambivalence because you're on your own. You don't want to bore people. I always worry, is it getting boring? And so I'm going to time travel back to 1995 and play this piece I wrote for piano. And I have not purposely, I did not practice it. I just dug up the sheet music, so there may be some mistakes. To get the rawness of looking at 28-year-old me. I'm 58 now, so we're going back to 95. And I'll play a little something. Get acquainted here. Some coffee. All right. See what it says here, in case you didn't believe me? See? 1995. Going back. It's been a while. So. All right. So yeah, I wrote that at the age of 28. I don't know what to make of it now. It's what was on my mind at that time. So I was pretty serious about music, you might say, in those years. But that's just one again. That's a detail, just like seeing a person's face or seeing an outrageous '70s mustache on a guy or a beautiful silhouette of a woman. Yes, exactly, Monk. You're absolutely right. So I was very influenced. I'm hopefully not too much, but yeah, Crepuscle with Nelly. All that great Monk reflections, yeah, a little bit of Monk in there, yeah. But there's some other things in there, some Cedar Walton and other people. But that's yeah, exactly. It's a great tune. So that's what I was doing in my 20s with the snowstorm outside my window, in the 90s. So go figure. I don't know. It's interesting, right? So, where were we here? We gotta get back to reality here. What do we got here? So, there's a sense in which, anytime any of us make something, we have to, kind of go into what we're making, deep into it. Like when I wrote that piece I just played, I had to really clear away all distractions and just sit with the music, with the piano, and think and feel, and just basically try to write the best composition that I possibly could at that moment, bringing all to bear all my, at that time, perhaps meager experience and to bear on it and try to do the best I can. So really, it's no different. I'm 58 now, but when I approach every episode, I have the same kind of commitment to what I'm trying to do. Now, there's the question also of what do I do? And this is both a maybe a rhetorical question, but it also could be just like just a literal question that demands an answer. What do I do about making an art object or a piece of prose that I suspect might not be straightforward, or I suspect might be partly, not totally, but partly inaccessible, a little bit obscure. How do I present that to an audience? So, one of the things I did when I did my series on love is I used a series of books, and that was really helpful. So that's, again, a detail. The detail was this author at MIT wrote these books on love. So that's enormously helpful because I got all of Irving Singer's series, and I can sort of, in a way, rely on him. So when I discuss the Proust, Swann's Love and all these kinds of things, and a Proust great novel, I'm helped both by his scholarship and my own scholarship, having read the Proust admittedly in English and not in French, but that problem off to the side for the moment. But it sort of helps me because when you deal with Proust, in a sense, you could say, well, that part of the episode writes itself because Proust is so, in a way, so fabulous and so interesting. I have to do less work. You can just let Proust, read from Proust and let him do the work in a way. But getting more serious. I'm having that challenge now because I'm having to prepare for an episode. What are we here for? You have a bomb with me. Well, I don't know. We're discussing aesthetics, and we're discussing how I create my episodes. It's a very provocative username. Um, so I'm doing this Romanticism series. And so I'm dealing with two authors. I have to present to you, the audience, Heyman and Herder, which is not a law firm. Yeah, it's Heyman and Herder, which is not a law firm, but it's these two thinkers here. And these are these Germans from the 1750s, 1760s, you know. George Heyman and Herder. And of course, Johann Gottfried, both Johann von Herder. Herder's dates are 1744 to 1803, so really 18th century. He barely made it into the 19th century. Of course, there's a pupil, and there's a one was a teacher and one was a student. Now, I have to say that this is because Isaiah Berlin is the critic and scholar who did a lot of their research on both these German thinkers. But here's the challenge. This is my question. How do I make it come alive for you? Well, one thing I definitely want to do or can do is read from their writing, so you get a sense of how these dudes wrote. And I could talk a little bit about how their writing came to be the way that it is and sound that way. And so I might discuss Kant, and I may have to do a little bit of, discuss the history of German philosophy, because you can't escape it. Hegel and Kant, of course. And I might talk a little bit about Romanticism and romance, and I might play a scene from Brief Encounter. I'm not saying I'm going to play a scene from Brief Encounter, but I'm tempted to play David Lean's Brief Encounter or Juan Kor-Wai's In the Mood for Love. And, I did these series on 70s cinema. And that's a kind of a risky series to do because I played entire sequences from these movies. And, you can get taken down. There could be Copyright Act of 1976 notwithstanding. Fair use notwithstanding, it could get a little risky. But the only way really to talk about these movies or these books in I guess you might say a proper way, is to get into the details of the detail. In other words, you get into the moment. Which brings up, of course, recent news. A lot of really, 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 really big names in the arts have passed this week. Robert Duvall, the actor, just to name one example. Bud Cort, Harold and Maude, Hal Ashby, lots of people. So one of my very first names on the dream list was Frederick Wiseman. And I'm going to say it here to clear up misconceptions about what I think about Fred Wiseman. Fred Wiseman was not only one of the greatest documentary filmmakers, he was one of the greatest filmmakers, period, irrespective of whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And I've seen all of his films, or practically all of his films. Maybe there's one or two I've missed. I loved Fred Wiseman's movies. And Fred Wiseman's movies, to hear him talk about his process, which I got to do in person actually a couple times, and in interviews and seeing his films, I think Fred Wiseman, he made his films were actually, of course, known for their length. They could be 2, 3, 4 hours. Maybe, Belfast, Maine is long, for example, Near Death. I mean, one of my favorites of his is Domestic Violence, which I think is 6 hours long. And I've seen Domestic Violence in theaters in both, it's part one. Yeah, it's a 6 hour long film about the issue of domestic violence. Now, I'm going to sound really pretentious, and there's just no other way to put this. The reason why I love Wiseman so is that And this is interesting because people say Wiseman doesn't edit. So as an aside, he edits, he doesn't just turn the camera on and have it run for 3 hours. As he says, there's an enormous amount of editing, even in his long takes that he does in cinema. But he takes his camera and he takes it into this therapy place in Tampa, Florida, in the case of domestic violence, and lets us experience and sit with these women in their telling their stories about their marriages and about their lives, and pretty damn close to an unexpurgated, you could say unadulterated, unedited manner, even though it's highly edited. As Wiseman said himself, I edit for structure. So for Wiseman, he says, I want my documentary films to be like a poem. So he literally was trying to make a poem, a novel, a play, a painting, a landscape painting, a piece of music, classical music. That's what he was trying to emulate those forms in documentary. His goal was not simply to tell you the truth or just to give you the facts of a situation. And so, as we all know, he did institutions. So he would do film on the high school, a film on the City Hall of Belfast, Maine, or a film on a hospital, or a welfare. I discussed the film Welfare, high school welfare, all these institutions. What did he do? 60 movies, 70 movies, Meet, Model, all these movies. But what I'm saying is that in the case of domestic violence, we more or less have to sit in that audience, or at home if they're on PBS, and sit with these women for like an hour. And not only sit with these women in this situation for an hour, but sit with their kind of what we would call the boring stuff, like them going over their schedule of when breakfast is, or what we would call admin things. Yeah, that's true in one sitting. Yeah, admin things, but that's not all. The second part of domestic violence is cops going out on calls. Domestic violence calls for 3 hours, and you're just outside, you never enter the house, and it's a woman that's called the cops on her boyfriend or on her husband. So what I'm saying is that when you sit with situations like this, in no voiceover, very important, no music, I think it's pretty close, and I think it's fair to say, and again, I hesitate to put it this way because it sounds sort of corny and pretentious. It's a spiritual practice, his films, I'd say. It's close to religion, actually. Whether he intended that or not, or in my country, fictional work, police responding to domestic violence. What's that? Okay, well, all right, but it's calls in that film, or even more, in his film Model, his model's going out on calls to do fashion modeling in the 70s. But see, Wiseman says that the theme of this film comes last. So he says, I want to make a movie about an institution, but the last thing I worry about is the theme. The theme comes last. What's first is the people. So he's interested in being with the people. His authority and his obligation is to the people he's covering and their environment. Only secondary or last is, what point am I trying to make? He's not motivated by necessarily advocacy or even activism, and he's not motivated, in that way. He's motivated on respecting the people. And the results are, well, they're on the camera. In his films, the results are if you haven't seen Wiseman movies, I mean, they do require commitment, like A War and Peace or like the other books I described, of time, but it's very worth it. And it is, for lack of a better word, they are, to me, spiritual films in a way that most documentaries are not. Because when you sit with the people in his films, you're actually learning something about other human beings, and something like a very I think, a very complete and a very comprehensive manner. And I think it's just fantastic what he did, and that's how I feel about it, you know. And it's only one kind of movie. There's other kinds of documentary. I mean, Liz Garbus's work, she does movies about crime for HBO. She's a good filmmaker, very different, of course. There's a more traditional people talking to the camera and, you know, and questions, but her films are good too. There's a lot. So I always say there's never not one right way of making a movie, not one right way to write a song or write a piece of music. All kinds of different ways, and each of the ways has their own pluses and minuses, and their drawbacks and shortcomings, and as well as virtues and vices, right? So this is a tricky thing. So I got to do this for next month. I mean, I've already read these books, so it helps that I've read Hamann and Herder, so it isn't like I'm, for the first time, exposed to these Germans. But the work I have to do between now and in March is I got to go through these texts, and I got to, you know, pick out passages and think, you know, well, what would be a good passage to read? And so what I do is I get out the books, and so give you an example. I have a dog-eared thing here. Now here's a particularly kind of wild and expressive passage that I think would be good to, in an episode about Romanticism, to recite or read, because boy is this romantic. So check this out. This is from an essay by Johann Herder called On the Cognition and Sensation of the Human Soul. So already his very title, On the Cognition and Sensation of the Human Soul, so that tells you what you're in for. The dude put that as the title of his, I'm just saying. But anyhow, here we go. This is just in medias res. Does not all life sprout further? Does not each spark of creation purify itself upward through channels to a subtler flame? And in this case, moreover, it was the most insouled spark of the irritation and the creative force of two through and through ensouled beings that leapt. Again, we don't know the context here, so. Oh yeah, absolutely. I do not say that I hereby explain, and explain is italicized, everything. I have not yet known any philosophy that explained what force is. Whether force stirs in a single being or in two beings. What philosophy does is to observe, italicized, order together, elucidate after it always already presupposes force, irritation, efficacy. Now I do not understand why, if nothing can be explained in each individual, one should deny the efficacy of one thing on another and deride in the unification of two things phenomena of nature which one accepts unexplained in the case of each thing individually, period. Now that's a mouthful. And so what I might want to do is talk about how Germans in this time, and also continental philosophy in general, write sentences like that. And I might talk about how the British hate this kind of writing. There isn't a British author, even the British authors that respect Herder and like it, that don't disapprove of what I just read there. It's so contrary to, you know, what philosophers in the UK want to do. They love clarity, and they like, you know, want to be, you know, it's not accidental that the British have, I think, let's get on with it, is an old British phrase. So this is the tension between the, you know, the continental and the UK. But you know, there's a dubiousness about this, sought to be dubious. But I'm going to have to discuss that, of course, and say, well, these two traditions. This cat is German, and I might want to talk about, well, what is Herder doing here? Why is he writing that way? And you know, part of it is things like Lutheranism, which means we might have to talk about the history of Protestant Christianity and pietism, and these are actual schools, and so we might have to go to school ourselves and the history of Christianity. Of course, I can't do all of that. I can only do some of it. We can't go through the whole history of Catholicism, Protestantism. What does the word ensouled mean? And go into talk about New Age mysticism and all this. But this is a text from the 1700s, so But I go over things like that, and I just read that to you now, but I'm not going to use that because I know it's too thorny. I might have to pick something else, So I have to pick a passage that's a little more or less clear, relatable. And the whole book is like that, The whole essay is like that. And it's, that's this one dude. But I have work to do, and my work is to present material like these two Germans, the two H's, to you in a way that you can sort of, that's interesting, in a way that it's not too off-putting, in a way that actually is relatable if I can, the degree to which I can. And that's a case where an episode is, the demands of an episode is dictated by the material. In this case, these strange writers from a bygone era. Sometimes, an episode is dictated by something else. It might be dictated by a style of music or anything. But of course, romanticism, this is very romantic. And, it's people pouring their heart out on the page. They did that, and romantics do that. And it very much connects to my Valentine's lunch with Joe, because that's what Patti Smith does every time she writes. So you could draw a line between these Germans and then Patti Smith. She's partaking in the same, I think, lineage and tradition. And maybe Thelonious Monk too, I don't know. So these are things I'm thinking about, but I guess the thing that's difficult for me is I have to sift through all of this material that I've internalized and that I've, made part of my nervous system, as I like to put it. And I have to bring out, or of all of this material, a handful of details. Like the detail of me in that snowstorm and that tree in that car. I have to bring out the best detail, or the right detail. And figure out how to make those details, I guess you might say, tell a story that I want to tell for that episode. And maybe it's the same in music and everything. I really don't know. There's so much I don't know. I only make my best guess, with the materials that I have. And, that's the best that any of us can do, right? Make our best guess. And so, doing episodes like the one I do today, where I'm just talking myself, it's a little harder, I welcome having Alex and Joe and Deb on the show, because I can sort of sit back and, listen to what they have to say. It's a little bit, I don't always want to be talking all the time. And, quite honestly, I'm going to say something that's going to sound very corny to you, but between you and between us, there isn't a single episode I've done on this show, not one, where I haven't learned something completely new about life from that episode. Not one. I've done, 100 episodes, and every single one I learned something new from when I had a guest. Something I didn't know, or look at something in a different way. And I was not trying for that. It was not something expect, and it's not something that, but it's happened, and there is that. If you're among the curious, people high in curiosity, of which I admittedly am one, that's more than a bonus. That's a lot of the point of it. So I make these shows, and they're different, and the subject matter dictates the show. And go see a Fred Wiseman movie. See, if you could sit through domestic violence, it's worth it. High School 2 is an optimistic Fred Wiseman. It has a sunny optimism. It's a wonderful film because it's about it's actually about a high school that isn't bad, It's a pretty decent high school, and so it gives it there's an optimism in that particular film. There's so many. I met Robert Duvall once. He was shooting Rambling Rose. Great film with Laura Dern and company. Martha Coolidge picture. These are all artists that did so many things, contributed so much, to our universe and our life. And another thing too about my show is it's a way to remind ourselves that the world is not all bad. There are many bad things, and we hear relentless news about all the awfulness, daily awfulness. But there is that strange sentence from Herder. That sentence was kind of interesting. That wasn't all bad. And, what it means to be human. Yeah, exactly. That isn't bad. And we can, when we're faced with a sentence like this, I think, the Brits really hate this. Even while some of those Brits taught this material. And, it's something to talk about. Why do people... that topic, why whole geographies do philosophy in a certain way and reject other ways of doing philosophy. That in itself, we could spend that's just such an enormously fascinating topic, because why is it that because I come from Leeds or Binghamton or even London, I'm going to philosophize differently than if I come from Frankfurt or Cologne? Why is that? That is interesting, and I'm not saying it's everything, and it's not the only reason, but these things are, at least to someone like myself who loves philosophy, is interested in philosophy, endlessly fascinating topic, and some of my personal favorite shows have been with people that do that kind of stuff. Robert Pippin and Elizabeth Anderson and George Kateb and some of these kind of, Michael Berendt, when we discuss Foucault. Those are some of my favorite episodes because I get to talk about stuff that I love, and there's that too. And so I'm going to go back into that a little bit this upcoming month. And I have an authority on Shakespeare next month as well. Dr. Daw, really something. A lot of good stuff coming up. So tune in to us, subscribe, and I hope we have something to share with you, and I hope we have... I was going to quote a fictional character. What was that? I forget. It's a line, Ron Liebman from a movie. I don't remember what it was. What is it? I think, got something to share with you. This person has something to talk to you, or something that's relevant to you. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it might be. And, Is George Fraser, one of my, not the boxer, but the Boston columnist and fashion plate, said, every day is important. And I do think every day is important. And so there's that too. So thank you. And the weekend is almost here, so have a great weekend if you can. And to be continued.